Testing season is right around the corner, and this is when confidence really matters. When kids take time to review key concepts and strengthen their skills before assessments, it can make all the difference. IXL helps reinforce what they're learning right now, so they walk into every test feeling prepared, capable, and confident. IXL is an award-winning online learning platform that helps kids truly understand what they're learning, whether they're building math confidence, strengthening reading and writing skills, or reviewing science concepts. Designed for students from pre-K through 12th grade, IXL delivers personalized, interactive practice that adapts to your child's level and pace. It's an easy, effective way to support learning as the school year heads into its final stretch. Studies show kids who use IXL score higher on tests, proven in all 50 states. IXL is used in 96 of the top 100 school districts in the U.S. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXLlearning.com/audio. Visit IXLlearning.com/audio to get the most effective learning program out there at the best price.
At Graybar, we know your time is money. That's why our services go beyond parts and products. With kitting, pre-assembly, wire carts, and Graybar smart reels that keep you moving. We stage materials and manage logistics so you can spend less time sorting and more time installing. And with locations nationwide, we deliver when and where you need it, working to make your job easier every step of the way. Yep, Graybar does that.
Presented by T-Mobile, the official wireless partner of Odyssey Sports. With an awesome network and great savings, there's never been a better time to join T-Mobile. Visit your neighborhood store to make the switch today.
How do I end this? That was the question playing on a loop inside of Emily's head. The road had been straight for so long that Emily had begun to feel like they weren't really traveling anywhere at all. It simply stretched forward in an endless gray ribbon, cutting through flat land that looked sun-bleached and abandoned. Dry grass rippled in the wind beyond the shoulder, and every few miles a telephone pole leaned beside the road like something tired of standing. The sky was wide and pale, the afternoon sun hanging high and indifferent above it all. Emily rested her forehead lightly against the passenger window and watched the landscape smear past in slow repetition. Tim hummed quietly while he drove. He always did that. Never an actual song, just a soft, repetitive melody under his breath, like the ghost of music that never fully formed. Once, early in their relationship, Emily had found it comforting. It made long drives feel peaceful, like they were sharing some quiet rhythm of the road together. Now it only seemed to emphasize the silence between them. The sound looped endlessly, rising and falling in the same absent-minded pattern, and she found herself clenching her jaw each time he started the melody over again. She shifted slightly in her seat and glanced toward him. Tim's hands rested casually on the steering wheel, one thumb tapping lightly in time with his humming. His blonde hair moved in the warm breeze coming through the cracked window, and his expression carried the calm, contented look of someone who believed everything in his life was exactly the way it should be. Emily looked away again. The question had been circling in her mind for nearly the entire drive. How do you even say it? She had been rehearsing different versions of the conversation since they left the city that morning. Each attempt played out differently in her head, and every one of them somehow sounded worse than the last. Tim, I think we should talk. Too ominous. Tim, I've been doing a lot of thinking. That one sounded like she was about to confess to something terrible. The problem wasn't that Tim had done anything wrong. If anything, that made it harder. Tim was kind, he was thoughtful, he remembered birthdays and opened doors, and there were no dramatic arguments between them, no explosive fights that would make leaving feel justified. Tim was simply fine. Dependable in the same way that furniture was dependable. You knew where it would be, you knew what purpose it served. It never surprised you, never disappointed you. But it never made your heart race either. Emily watched the horizon blur ahead of them and felt the now familiar tightness settle in her chest. Every time Tim talked about the future, about houses with big yards, about getting a dog, about moving somewhere quieter someday, she felt something inside her shrink. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the creeping certainty that if she stayed, if she nodded along and let things continue the way they had been going, then 10 years from now she would still be sitting beside him on drives like this. Tim would still be humming softly to himself, and they would both be pretending that comfortable silence meant happiness. Tim glanced over at her briefly, catching the way her head rested against the glass. "Getting sleepy?" Emily forced a small smile and nodded. "A little." "You can nap if you want," he said easily. "We've still got a few hours." A few hours. She nodded again, murmuring a quiet, "Okay," and shifted deeper into the seat. The hum of the tires against the pavement vibrated gently through the car, blending with the warm air drifting through the window. The road rolled steadily beneath them, mile after mile of quiet repetition, and her thoughts began to loosen as the rhythm of the drive settled around her. Maybe after dinner, she thought. They would stop somewhere along the highway, some small roadside diner with fluorescent lights and laminated menus. She could say it there, gently and calmly. Tim would be hurt, of course, but he would understand. He was the kind of person who tried to understand things even when he didn't want to. Her eyelids grew heavier, the sunlight warmed her cheek, the tires hummed softly beneath them. Tim's quiet melody blended into the steady rhythm of the road. Without realizing it, Emily slipped into sleep. When she woke, it was with a small, confused breath, the kind that came when your mind surfaced suddenly from deep water. For a moment, she couldn't understand what had changed, only that something felt different. The vibration beneath her seat was gone, the slow, steady hum of the road had disappeared. Emily blinked slowly and lifted her head from the window. The car wasn't moving. Her thoughts were still thick with sleep as she straightened in the seat and rubbed her eyes. The first thing she noticed was the silence inside of the car. The second thing she noticed was that the driver's seat was empty. "Tim?" Her voice sounded rough and quiet in the stillness. No answer. Emily sat up a little straighter and looked around. The world outside the windows had changed completely. The open fields and distant horizons were gone, replaced by thick forests pressing close against the narrow road. Trees crowded both sides of the asphalt, their trunks tall and dark, their branches tangled together overhead so that the sunlight filtered through in muted patches. The road itself was different too, smaller, tighter. Only 2 lanes now, with a thin strip of gravel where Tim's car had been pulled off to the side. Emily frowned, still trying to shake the sleep from her head. "Tim?" Still nothing. She leaned forward slightly, peering through the windshield as if he might suddenly appear, walking back down the road. But the road stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into the dim tunnel of trees. Maybe he had stepped out to use the bathroom. That seemed likely enough. They must have turned off the highway while she was asleep. Still, a small thread of confusion tugged at her. She unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the passenger door open. The cooler air outside brushed against her face as she stepped onto a gravel shoulder. The quiet was striking. The forest absorbed sound in a strange way, making the world feel padded and distant. Emily stretched her arms over her head and turned slowly. "Tim!" Her voice drifted down the empty road. Still no response. She walked a few steps towards the front of the car and looked both ways, shading her eyes as she searched the roadside. The trees stood thick and unmoving, their shadows pooling in the undergrowth. There was no sign of anyone walking along the road, no rustling branches or shifting leaves that suggested movement. "Tim!" The word echoed faintly through the trees before dissolving into silence. Emily felt a flicker of irritation rise in her chest. "Tim!" she shouted, again, louder than the previous times. The forest remained stubbornly quiet. "Very funny," she said. After another moment, she exhaled sharply and turned back towards the car. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes as she walked around the front bumper and climbed back into the passenger seat. "Unbelievable," she muttered. The door shut with a heavier thud than she intended. The silence inside the car now felt different, less peaceful, more tense. She glanced in the mirrors again, expecting to see him jogging back down the road with some sheepish explanation. Her irritation flared. Emily leaned forward and pressed her palm firmly against the horn. The sound exploded through the quiet forest, a long, blurry note that seemed almost violent against the stillness. She held it there for several seconds before letting it go. The echo bounced between the trees and faded slowly away. She waited. Nothing happened. Emily pressed the horn again, longer this time, then followed it with a series of sharp, impatient honks. One after another. Still nothing. She flipped on the hazard lights, and the interior of the car filled with the rhythmic clicking of the signal relay as the orange lights began flashing outside. Emily leaned back in the seat and folded her arms tightly against her chest, staring out through the windshield. Minutes passed in slow, uncomfortable silence. The woods remained motionless, as if the car and its noise had no effect on them at all. Gradually, without her noticing at first, the light began to change. The afternoon sun slipped lower behind the thick wall of trees, draining the warmth from the sky. Shadows stretched across the narrow road, creeping slowly toward the parked car. The forest seemed to grow darker, deeper, the trunks of the trees blending together into a single wall of shadow. Emily shifted in her seat and checked the dashboard clock. The hazards continued their steady rhythm. Click, click, click. Outside, the last pale streaks of sunlight filtered through the branches and began to fade. The road ahead dimmed into a gray corridor between the trees, and the forest slowly, quietly began to swallow the day. Emily sat in the passenger seat long after the last warmth of the sun had drained from the sky. At first, she told herself that Tim would return any minute. Maybe he had walked farther down the road than she expected. Maybe he had wandered deeper into the woods to relieve himself and simply lost track of time. The explanations came easily at first, each one feeling reasonable enough to quiet the rising tension in her chest. But the minutes kept passing. The woods remained silent. The hazard lights continued their steady rhythm. The orange flashes briefly illuminating the trees before fading again into gathering darkness. Emily checked her phone again, although she knew already what it would show. Her irritation had cooled into something colder and more uncertain. The forest beyond the windshield was slowly turning back, the trees dissolving into tall shadows that crowded the narrow road. Every few minutes she leaned forward and honked the horn again, hoping the sound might draw Tim back, or at least provoke some kind of response from the world around her. Nothing answered. Eventually, she turned the hazards off to conserve the battery. The silence that followed felt immediate and oppressive, as if the forest had been waiting patiently for the noise to stop. The darkness deepened quickly after that. Without the blinking lights, the road outside the car became a thin gray strip barely visible through the windshield. Emily rubbed her hands over her face and forced herself to think clearly. First, the keys. If Tim had walked off somewhere, he might have left them behind. It wasn't impossible. He had done absent-minded things before. She leaned forward and searched the console, opening compartments, checking the cup holders, running her hands along the floor mats and beneath the seats. She even checked the back seat, digging through the pile of jackets and bags they had tossed there earlier in the drive. Nothing. The keys were gone. That realization landed heavily in her stomach. Without the keys, the car was just a box sitting on the side of the road that apparently led nowhere. Emily looked out at the darkened forest again. Walking crossed her mind briefly. The road had to lead somewhere, eventually. A house, a gas station, another road. But the thought of stepping out into that darkness made her chest tighten immediately. The trees pressed too close to asphalt, forming walls of blackness that seemed to swallow the road only a short distance away. She imagined walking for miles in either direction and finding nothing. No lights, no cars, no people, just trees. Emily exhaled slowly and leaned back into the seat. The decision came reluctantly, but once it formed, it made a certain practical sense. Walking at night would be stupid. If the road really was as empty as it seemed, she could wander for hours in the dark and still end up nowhere. Morning was different. In daylight, she could see where she was going. She could follow the road with the full day ahead of her. All she had to do was wait. Emily climbed to the back seat and stretched out awkwardly across the worn upholstery. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than sitting upright all night. She folded her jacket beneath her head and stared up at the ceiling of the car, listening to the faint ticking sounds of the engine cooling beneath the hood. Outside, the forest had become completely black. At first, the silence seemed total. Then slowly, other sounds began to emerge. Small ones, the rustle of leaves shifting somewhere in the distance. A faint creaking sound from deep within the trees, like branches moving against one another. Once she thought she heard something moving through the underbrush far beyond the roadside, but it faded so quickly she couldn't be certain. Emily told herself it was normal. Forests made noise at night. Animals moved. Wind passed through branches. Still, each sound made her body tense. She rolled onto her side and glanced toward the windshield. The road outside was almost invisible now, but the faint glow of the sky above the trees left enough light to make out shapes. The empty asphalt stretched forward between the dark walls of forest. Emily closed her eyes. For a few minutes she tried to focus on breathing slowly, willing her body to relax. That was when she heard footsteps.
It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Presented by T-Mobile, the official wireless partner of Odyssey Sports. With an awesome network and great savings, there's never been a better time to join T-Mobile. Visit your neighborhood store to make the switch today.
Looking for something smart, soulful, and full of heart? I'm Jen Hatmaker, host of For the Love, the podcast where we talk about what really matters. Love and family, faith and purpose. Every week, I'm joined by incredible guests for honest conversations that invite all of us to live with more intention, more laughter, and more connection. Join us on For the Love wherever you get your podcasts.
They were soft at first, barely audible over the quiet of the forest. A slow, crunching sound against gravel somewhere outside the car. Emily's eyes opened immediately. She pushed herself up onto her elbows and listened. The sound came again. Someone was walking on the road. Relief flooded her chest so quickly she almost laughed. "Tim!" The footsteps stopped. Emily leaned forward slightly, peering into the darkness. That was when she saw it. A shape, standing in the road ahead of the car. Tall. Still. Emily's heart thudded hard against her ribs. "Tim!" The figure did not move. The posture, the way it stood in the center of the road without shifting or reacting to her voice. Emily scrambled forward into the front seat and reached for the headlight switch. The beams exploded outward, flooding the road with white light. The asphalt ahead was completely empty. There was no one there, no figure, no person. The road stretched forward between the trees exactly as it had before. Her breath came out in a shaky exhale. She stared into the headlights for several seconds, waiting to see movement. Nothing happened. Finally, she reached forward and switched the lights back off. Darkness swallowed the road again, but the figure returned. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. It stood in the exact same place as before, motionless in the center of the road. Her hand flew back to the headlights. The beams flared on. Empty road. Lights off, the figure was there again. This time it was closer. Emily felt the first cold spike of genuine fear slide through her chest. Her hand trembled as she flicked the lights on again. Nothing. She turned them off slowly. The figure stood there once more, closer now. And from somewhere in the darkness around it came a sound, faint, but high, almost playful. Laughter. It was distant at first, echoing softly through the trees like children laughing somewhere far away. She flipped the headlights on again. The road was empty. Lights off, the figure moved closer. The laughter grew louder, the soft giggling gliding through the darkness. Emily's hand shook violently as she stabbed the lock button on her door. The car chirped once as the locks engaged. She pressed it again, and again. Then she leaned over and hit the manual lock on the passenger door just to be sure. Outside, the laughter continued. Lights on, nothing. Lights off, the figure now stood only a short distance from the car. Emily could see the shape more clearly now in the faint light of the sky. Its head tilted slightly to one side as if studying the vehicle. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The laughter was closer now. It was right outside the car. Lights on, nothing. Lights off, the figure stood beside the front of the car. Emily let out a strangled sound and scrambled back into the rear seat, pulling her knees tight against her chest. Outside, the giggling grew louder, closer. It was all around the car now. And then something touched the hood. A long, dragging sound scraped slowly against the metal. Emily froze. The noise stretched across the length of the hood in one slow motion. A fingernail, followed by silence. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst from her chest. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then came the first tap, directly beside her ear. Emily turned her head slowly towards the passenger window. She squeezed her eyes shut. The tapping stopped. For a moment, the night returned to silence. Then a voice whispered from the other side of the window, playful, right beside her ear.
Come out and play.
The next thing Emily heard was the sound of glass exploding. Emily jerked upright with a strangled gasp as something struck the passenger window with a violent crack. Shards rattled against the door frame and the sudden noise tore her fully awake. For one disoriented second, she expected to see the figure from the road standing outside the car, smiling through broken glass. Instead, she saw sunlight. Bright morning light flooded the interior of the vehicle, and a uniformed police officer stood outside the door where the window had been shattered. "Ma'am?" he barked through the opening. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Emily blinked rapidly, her brain scrambling to catch up with the moment. The forest outside the car looked completely different in daylight, quiet and ordinary. The trees green and harmless in the morning sun. For a moment, she simply stared at the officer in confusion, her heart still racing from the violent wake-up. "Ma'am?" the officer repeated more firmly now. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Emily fumbled for the car door handle and pushed it open, climbing stiffly out onto the gravel shoulder. Her legs felt shaky beneath her, the remnants of the night's fear still clinging to her like cold sweat. Another police cruiser sat 10 feet behind Tim's car, its red and blue lights flashing lazily against the trees. A second officer stood beside it, a woman with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She watched Emily with a tense expression that Emily couldn't quite read. The male officer stepped a little closer. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Emily nodded weakly, brushing stray glass from her sleeve. I think so." "You been here all night, ma'am?" "I think so," she said, still trying to piece together the timeline in her head. "My boyfriend pulled over and he disappeared." The officer frowned slightly. "Disappeared?" Emily nodded quickly, words beginning to spill out now that someone was finally there to listen. "Yes, his name is Tim. We were driving and I fell asleep, and when I woke up, the car was stopped and he was gone. I looked for him, I called for him, but I couldn't find him. I tried honking. I honked a lot, and I waited, but he never came back." The officer listened carefully, nodding once or twice as she spoke. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes moved constantly, taking in the car, the road, the forest around them. "You searched the area, ma'am?" "Just around the car," Emily said. "I didn't want to walk in the dark." The officer nodded again. "That was probably a good idea, ma'am." Behind him, the female officer remained near the patrol car, watching the exchange with a quiet intensity. Emily rubbed her arms. I thought maybe he'd come back by the morning. The male officer seemed about to ask another question when his gaze shifted suddenly past her shoulder. His expression changed instantly. The calm professionalism drained from his face, replaced by something sharp and alert. Can you open the trunk, ma'am? Emily blinked. What? Ma'am? He said again, more firmly now. He took a step backward. Emily noticed his hand drifting toward the holster at his hip. Open the trunk, please. Confusion rippled through their chest. Why? What are you... Ma'am, he interrupted, his voice suddenly tight. Open the trunk. Now. The female officer had straightened beside her cruiser now. Her posture had gone rigid. Emily turned slowly and walked toward the back of the car. Gravel crunched under her shoes as she reached the trunk latch. For a moment, she hesitated, glancing back toward the officers. The male officer had fully drawn his gun now and pointed it directly at her. Open it! Her pulse hammered in her ears as she lifted the latch. The trunk popped open with a dull metallic click. The male officer stepped forward cautiously, gun still raised. He moved just enough to peer inside, and then he froze. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost shocking. For a long second, he didn't move. Hands behind your back, he said, nervously. Emily flinched violently. What? Hands behind your back! The sudden fury in his voice made her recoil. She stared at him, completely lost. I don't understand. What? Hands behind your back! The female officer was already moving towards them, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. What's going on? I don't understand. Turn around, the woman ordered. Emily obeyed automatically. The cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists, locking tight against her skin. Behind her, the male officer stepped away from the trunk and grabbed the radio on his shoulder. His voice came out strained and urgent. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We need backup immediately. I repeat, immediate backup. Possible homicide scene. Possible homicide scene. Emily felt the words pass through her without meaning. Homicide? Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. The officers weren't listening anymore. The male cop kept talking rapidly into the radio while the female officer tightened the cuffs and guided Emily a few steps away from the car. Emily turned her head slowly. Her eyes drifted back toward the open trunk. For a moment, she could only see darkness inside of it. And then her eyes adjusted, and she saw him. Tim lay crumpled inside the trunk. His throat had been cut so deeply that the collar of his shirt was soaked black with dried blood. His eyes were gone, empty sockets staring upward toward the lid of the trunk. His arms ended in jagged stumps where his hands had once been. His legs had been severed at the ankles. Emily stared at the body in silent disbelief as a cold understanding crept slowly into her chest. Her lips trembled. Her gaze remained fixed on Tim's mutilated face. Emily was placed into the backseat as the two cops got into their respective phones, calling for help and assistance. It was just a matter of time until they found out that her name was not Emily. Her name was Georgia. She had a brother who owned a very powerful book. A book that made the bad men go away. But she never asked for this. She never asked for Tim to go away, not like this. That meant her brother had broken their promise. It was only a matter of time now, before Georgia had to find her brother and make him go away.
Testing season is right around the corner, and this is when confidence really matters. When kids take time to review key concepts and strengthen their skills before assessments, it can make all the difference. IXL helps reinforce what they're learning right now, so they walk into every test feeling prepared, capable, and confident. IXL is an award-winning online learning platform that helps kids truly understand what they're learning, whether they're building math confidence, strengthening reading and writing skills, or reviewing science concepts. Designed for students from pre-K through 12th grade, IXL delivers personalized, interactive practice that adapts to your child's level and pace. It's an easy, effective way to support learning as the school year heads into its final stretch. Studies show kids who use IXL score higher on tests, proven in all 50 states. IXL is used in 96 of the top 100 school districts in the U.S. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXLlearning.com/audio. Visit IXLlearning.com/audio to get the most effective learning program out there at the best price.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
When it comes to lighting, Graybar goes beyond parts and products. We help contractors turn plans into smart designs, manage kitting and deliverables, and navigate local codes so you can stay on time and on budget. Smart, scalable, job site ready. That's not just lighting. That's like kicking your project into Graybar mode. Yep, Graybar does that.